The reason I jumped on today in the scale session is probably one of the most valuable things I ever learned in business is this philosophy called Kaizen. And I'm going to drop into the chat box the link to this workbook for you guys, but it's just basically the slides. We'll be going through a few activities today to understand this philosophy and how we apply it in small business. Who's familiar with Kaizen as a principle? Can I just get a quick show of hands? No? Yes. Okay. I'll give you the backstory. It's super interesting. So Kaizen is a Japanese word, and there's a guy by the name of Edward Deming. And Edward Deming is considered one of the 9 turning points in the history of mankind. That's how significant he is, but no one really knows who he is. He was the guy that the Americans sent over to Japan after the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yeah. And the thing was that they wanted to help rebuild the country, right? Because they devastated the whole of Japan. Now, for those who are as old as me will remember that, you know, in the good old days, Japanese products were crap. Right? It was called Jap crap, right? Yep. And it's funny because China then took the place of doing the crappy products, and now China's starting to do quality. So now it's moving to Pakistan and other countries as well, right? And Bangladesh. But what happened was Edward Deming went to Japan after the war. He was sent over there by the Americans. And if you go into the Hall of Fame in Japan, into the museums, he's the only non-Japanese person who has his photo in there. And what he did is he went into Japan and he started looking at the way they were producing things. And he said, guys, you've got a bit of a problem with quality. And they never really thought it was a problem until then. And he said, but the thing is that the quality of your product is only poor because you're not really thinking about how to make it better. All you're doing is just producing on volume. And so he ended up going in there and you'll hear things like Six Sigma. You might have heard of Six Sigma. You might have heard of lean manufacture. And the other thing we're going to talk a bit about today is what's called quality circles. Okay. Now, all of those things came from this philosophy of how do we do it better? Okay. That's the principle. The question that Kaizen invokes. And if you look at what Kaizen is, and hopefully my beautiful slides will work a treat today, the actual symbol in Japanese has two emblems, Kai and Zen. And Kai is change and Zen is good. And so the language that it invokes is this idea of good change and continual improvement. So what Edward Deming started to get all of the Japanese manufacturers to look at was creating what they call quality circles. And he said, I want you to get all of your workers together and I want you to bring them into a room on a weekly basis and ask them this question. Have you got any suggestions on how we can do things better? And it sort of started like with Gay's looks of, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I just do my job. But after a while, they started to cotton on that the idea of asking the people on the ground was valid because they were the ones doing the work. And they weren't looking for significant changes. They weren't suggesting changing the model of the business. They were just saying, in your role, is there anything that you can see that is really just not as efficient as it could be? And they started this idea of suggestion boxes, and all of the employees would put suggestions in the suggestion boxes. And what they would do is they'd look through every single one of them, they'd evaluate them, and then the ones that they thought were good ideas, they'd implement. And if that implementation created a saving or a profit gain in the business, they would give a share of that to that person for the idea. Right, clever stuff, right? And none of that's rocket science, except anyone who's tried suggestion boxes in the past has realized it's a sort of really quite a hard thing to get people to want to participate in. So they turned it into a policy of how they run business. Now, I used to sell IT equipment infrastructure many, many years ago before I started the coaching business in the 90s. And I was selling to Toyota. And Toyota is a big advocate of this whole Kaizen philosophy. And if you talk to anyone who's worked with any Japanese company, they'll tell you about it. And we used to have contractual obligations to sell products to these guys. And one of the strange things about the contract was the last line on the contract said, every year you will reduce the cost of your product or improve the value of your product by 5%. Right? And you signed the contract. Now imagine signing a contract that says every year you reduce your price by 5%. It's like, hang on, costs go up, they don't go down. And they said, it's not our problem, right? We have a philosophy in our business, and Toyota have been doing it to this very day, that every year we seek a 5% improvement of product or reduction of cost. And by doing that every single year, year on year, we've gone from being Jap crap to the finest manufacturer on the planet. Most people now say if you get a Japanese car, it's a good car, right? And which is interesting, right? When you think about the history. And so they've been now known to be the fine and the perfectionists of production. Now that didn't happen overnight. That happened over 40 years of this incremental improvement. So the philosophy is sound, and it's all about this percentage improvement that we do by just doing incremental changes and implementing those. But the biggest issue I find with most small business people is they're not looking for incremental change, they're looking for monumental change. You know, I need a marketing system that works, I need more clients, I need this, I need that. And you go, yeah, we get that. But anything you just described is big. It's the 1%ers stacking on top of each other that turned the Japanese economy from being bottom end to top end. So today I just want to talk about how that looks in a business. So this is the problem, right? The first problem is that we are stuck in a rut. And what I mean by that is we do things the way we've always done them, right? Because that's autopilot. And in autopilot, one of the risks is that we're not looking for ways to improve. Now, the danger of that as a business owner is that you feel like you're being productive, but you're just being busy. And so we're sometimes asking the question, how can we do it better? The first response is, what do you mean? I'm busy enough already, which is not what the question was. The question wasn't, how do we work harder? The question was, how do we work smarter? And people go, well, you know, and we could maybe look at our process, right? That's a big project. Or I had one guy, it was super interesting. He manufactured, they were a cardboard process manufacturer. And they've been doing this for 30 years. And I went into their workshop one day and he showed me around because people like to show me their workshop. And he said, this is where we create the dies. This is the cutting things. And there's an old guy there and he's creating these wooden things and putting metal on them and all this sort of stuff. And I'm looking at it going, so you're working over here. Yeah, that's where I work. But the bin where you put all your offcuts is like 100 meters away. He goes, yeah, it's been there for the past 20 years. I said, but he goes, but I used to work next to it. And as we've grown, I've moved away from it. And he didn't cotton on. And I said, so how many times do you go to the bin? He goes, every time I do an offcut, I walk over. I said, there's a lot of kilometers we're doing. And it sounds silly, but it's just simple stuff like that is a 1%er. Yeah, the other problem is status quo. You know, we can't see the forest for the trees, right? We're in our business. We think we're doing all right. We think we're doing the best we can. And this is justification. People say we're doing the best we can. The last one is that we're looking for a quick fix. And a good friend of mine once said, when you're looking for a quick fix, you get neither, right? It's not going to be quick and it's not going to be a fix. It's going to be some sort of, distraction. So the opportunity is simple. The opportunity to me is this, right? We plug the holes in what we do. So we look for holes and we plug them. And sometimes plugging holes is super clever because it means we don't need to get more clients. Right? We don't need to do more sales calls. We don't need to do more production. We just need to do it more efficiently. Yeah. The second thing is it's going to help energize the team. And this is one of my favorite things is when I go to my team and I say, how can we do it better? They sort of look at me blankly and go, that's your job, isn't it? You're the guy who runs the joint. And then when I say, no, I actually want it to be a team effort because you guys are doing the things every day. How do you think we can do it better? Now, first time you do that, they all get a bit of a shock. The second time you ask it, they start to realize you have an expectation. And sooner or later, they start to cotton on that part of their job is not just doing the work. Part of their job is actually thinking about how can we do the work better. And the other thing is where focus goes, energy flows. Okay. And I think a lot of what we do in this program is getting you to come here today and think about business systems. You go, well, what's that got to do with all the calls I have to do? Very little. But what's it got to do with you getting productivity improvement? A lot. Now, Fabrice, we haven't met before, so I actually don't know what your role is in the organization. Do you want to give me a quick snapshot?
Well, I'm more in the warehouse and
Perfect.
dealing with all the stuff of sending and all this.
Yes.
And then I'm trying to do a little bit of paperwork also.
Yep. Fantastic. So you'll get a lot out of today because I think this sort of ties in exactly with where you're at. And certainly for Kate and Annette, you've got teams, or if you don't have teams, you've got contractors. And if you don't have contractors, you're going to have them soon enough, right? Mm-hmm. And the trick here is to start thinking about how can they just do more than just what I tell them to? How can they actually contribute to my growth?
Yep.
So let's talk about a few principles. The first one, who knows Robert Kiyosaki? Heard that name before, Robert Kiyosaki. He wrote a book called The Cash Flow Quadrant. And it's a super interesting book because what he talks about is how we generate income. Okay, so a lot of people start their business life by being an employee. And this is great. Employee is really good because it does a couple of things. It gives us a wage. It gives us holidays, long service leave, and some level of support around that. Some people are really not happy with being employees, so they decide they want to start a business, so they become self-employed. And self-employment is pretty much like a job, except for one thing. You don't have a guaranteed paycheck anymore. And this is what we call business ownership in Australia. It's a bit risky. It requires effort, and it's still so the two employment and self-employment are both sort of hamstrung by one thing. It's time for money. So this requires effort. Okay. When we start looking at what happens on the other side of this is we move from self-employment into what's called being a business owner. And a business owner is a big distinction here. A self-employed person is an employee with a irregular wage. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And most small businesses are that, right? Which means I don't work, I don't get paid. And if I work really well, I get paid well, but it's quite variable. Business ownership is where instead of getting paid for effort, you get paid in terms of it's passive. Now, the reason I bring this up, and it even applies to you, Fabrice, is that as you move into management of the warehouse, okay, mm-hmm. You're looking for ways that the warehouse runs without you having to put in the effort.
Yep. And
this is working smarter, not harder. Now, the last piece of this puzzle is in Kiyosaki's book, he talks about being an investor. And he says, being a business owner still carries a lot of risk because if the business doesn't perform, then if you don't set direction, it'll still potentially not make money. But being an investor is literally, I put my money into something because it generates a return. The reason I show you this is that I think most of the time people really struggle with this idea of moving from this one to this one in terms of being business owners. Because in Australia, as soon as you become self-employed, you're a business owner. If you're a contractor, you have an ABN number. And so we kid ourselves into thinking, hey, we're a business owner. And you go, well, sort of. You're more like a tax collector than a business owner, but that's what it is. So the Kaizen principle works well if you're self-employed moving to business owner. If you're an employee, it will escalate you as an employee because it's about how you do things better. Okay. If you get paid per hour and you do things better, you get less, which is ironic. And this is one of the ironies of being paid by the hour is that the faster you are, the less you get. Yeah. So we need to think about, well, that's where we transition into this ownership status. The second thing I want to talk about is when we talk about business building, okay, we are talking about leverage today. We're talking about how do I do more with less? There's 3 stages to the growth of a business that we talk about often. And the very first stage in my mind is getting out of chaos and moving into control. Now, control looks like having systems, having numbers, right? As we've been talking about, Kate, using those numbers to steer. Okay, so having some sort of feedback mechanism that tells you whether the business is doing the right thing or not. Now, in terms of numbers, the most fundamental ones are turnover, revenue, profit, those sorts of things. But as it gets more sophisticated, we're looking for leading indicators like how many leads are coming in, what's our conversion rate, what's the yield, how many products are going out per day, per week, per month, so that we can use those numbers to drive our decision making. Does that make sense? So moving from chaos into control is the fundamental start to growing a business. The second part is this middle section, which is all about growth. Now, growth usually has 2 pieces to it. It's got to do with generating more business, so marketing and sales, and being able to deliver the service as well, so service delivery, okay? And a business that grows one without the other ends up in imbalance and not profitable. So if I'm doing too well in my marketing, but I can't deliver, I'm going to lose a lot of clients or my quality is going to be poor. If I've got a great delivery mechanism, but I don't have enough clients, I'm probably overinvested, which means I've either got too much warehouse space or too many employees sitting around twiddling their thumbs. So the trick for a person who's growing a business is to use 2 flywheels. One is get the business in the door, and the other one is deliver the service profitably. And when you increase one, which might be marketing, then you increase capacity, and this is growth, okay? Now, the distinction I want to give you here is that generally speaking, and this comes from another book by Michael Gerber called The E-Myth, which a lot of people have heard of. not as many people have read. He says, look, there's 3 stages of business ownership. The first one is what's known as the technician. That's the person who does the work. Yep. The second stage is moving from self-employed to business owner, or what's called manager. And this is probably where you're moving to, Fabrice, in your role, is moving into management. I've got John on this as well. And then the final step is where we talk about leverage, and what we're talking about today with Kaizen is leadership. And just to keep it really simple, this is what happens. A leader's job is to look forward. Okay, so they're looking into the future and they're saying, what's coming up? What are the trends in the marketplace? Where should we be going strategically? A manager's job is to look backwards and keep their eye on production of the team. So in the growth department, the manager's job is to make sure that we're selling enough and that we're delivering profitably. Does that make sense? And the technician's job is to run around like crazy and make sure that stuff gets done. Okay. Now, the problem with running around like crazy, making sure stuff gets done, is it's almost a certain formula for burnout. Okay, because we can do it for a number of years, but there's a point in time where it just exhausts us. Now, the way around that is to escalate. And in employment, that means moving from being the guy who does the work to being a guy who manages a team that does the work, the manager. In business ownership, there's an extra level up there, which is leadership. And even in the larger organizations, and I know like Stephen, who Fabrice works for, is very keen on bringing people into ownership and leadership of the business. Yeah. So if you know the levels that you're working through, you understand why we're doing this Kaizen. Make sense so far?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk about some of the key principles. And the first principle of Kaizen is that we need leadership in the organization. Because as you can imagine, when I go to my team and say, hey, how can we do it better? They're going to look at me blankly and go, what do you mean? Aren't you happy with what we're doing? And I'm saying, that's not the question. The question isn't, I'm not happy. I want you to look at the process and the service delivery and how we do that better. Now, when we talk about leadership in business, I picked this up from a guy by the name of Stephen Covey. Now, I'm going to mention lots of books today because that's my reference point. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Anyone read that? Yeah, one. In there, he talks about leadership, and he talks about what's called situational leadership. And he says, when we talk about leadership, what does it actually mean? And when I say the word leadership, I just want to quickly go around the table. What comes to mind? What's the first thing that comes to mind when I say leadership? Maybe we'll start with you, Annette.
Yeah, well, you're not a leader unless someone's following you. So right. It's the ability to draw people along with you on whatever path you're taking.
Yep, fantastic. And what about you, Kate? What comes up to mind when I say leadership?
Yeah, a director and motivator.
Director and motivator? Yep. Fantastic. Jean, hi.
Sorry being late, guys. I would say showing by examples.
Yeah, leading by example. Fantastic. And what about you, Fabrice?
A strong person, like strong personality to...
Yeah. So someone who's got a strong personality.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is everyone has their own view of what a leader should be, and it's a very fluffy topic, right? I'm going to spend about 5 minutes on it today to give you my view of the world. But I think leadership comes down to a level of respect that you earn, right? You don't demand, you earn. And if we look at respect, the way that Covey talked about it, he says there's two ways we can look at respect. One is self, and one is respect for others. And he said, when you think about respect for self and respect for others, it sort of ends up, you can end up with 4 quadrants. He loves quadrants. And he says, here's one of the issues. When someone has very low self-respect, which means I don't think I'm any good at my job. And then they have very low respect for others, which is I don't really think highly of the people I work for either. They become what he used to refer to as lose-lose. That's a person who doesn't care about the work they do, and they don't care about how their status in the marketplace or what other people think of them. Now, the problem with that sort of person in the workplace is they generally are very destructive. So when you get an employee that's low self-respect, low respect for others, they come to work because they need money. They don't love coming to work. They hate coming to work, and they like to drag everyone else down with them, right? So they're the sort of person that comes in late, tells you all the reasons why, goes to the smoko break, takes way too long, disappears into the bathroom for who knows what they're doing in there. has lunch that goes way too long and leaves early. And this is their whole life. And the way they justify it is by trying to get everyone else to do this as well. Does this make sense? Now, I'm not saying any one of us is that because you're here today, but you know the stereotype of what I'm talking about. The big issue for someone who's trying to lead a team is that person is toxic and can't be led. And so the hardest thing you'll ever have to do is to let those people go and work somewhere else. Then we tend to get a lot of what the other three boxes are. So the first one I want to talk about is someone who thinks they're good, they have good self-respect. They think they are great at their job, but they don't have high respect for others. And they fit into this little box up the top here. Now, they generally believe they're good, so they want to win, and they really don't care about other people. So they use what's called the win-lose philosophy. Now, a lot of managers do this, right? And this is what we call strong arm management or dictatorships. You know, if I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. And the only way to get my guys to work effectively is to be on them every single day. Micromanagement. We see a lot of this, right? And this type of scenario or this stereotype generally shows up as what's known as the bully. Now, in Australia, we have new laws that stop bullying. But bullying is typically someone who thinks they're good and thinks their employees aren't good, right? So their answer to that is to keep on their case all the time and make sure they use a big stick. And they call that management, but we call that tyranny, okay? Now, the problem with this personality type, by the way, this is situational. We all do this, right? It's just in different environments and different situations we do these things, and I'll explain that in a minute. Is we also have what's called the opposite of that, or what is the opposite of that, which is someone who has low self-esteem or low self-respect and high respect for others. Now, this person is almost the opposite of the bully, and they show up doing this sort of thing, lose, win. And what I mean by that is, I really don't know much about what I should be doing. I'm hopeless. If you just tell me what you want me to do, I'll just do what you tell me. Now, we all have some employees like this too, right? And if we think about that stereotype, unfortunately, that person looks like this.
Okay.
They're the doormat. Now, the doormat employee is the person who doesn't want to look arrogant and they don't want to boss people around, and they just want to come to work and do their job. And they go, look, you know, Kate, just tell me what you need done and I'll just do what you tell me. And if it stuffs up, you know, I just did what you told me, Kate, you know. And so they tend to always be, it's not my fault, you know, and it's just who I am, right? It's just the way it is. And they become very subservient. Now, the reason I bring this up is that if you have someone who's a strong personality and comes in, Annette, I'm going to work for you and I'm going to show those people who's boss. You go, oh, that's exactly what I need, someone who can run this place. Guess what sort of person the bully attracts into their world?
Doormats.
So what happens is the bully needs doormats because doormats substantiate the bully's position. You know, the blokes we have, if I'm not there, they don't do their job. And so therefore I need to be there. So that's why I have to be the bully. And the doormat says, I love going to work in a place where the boss keeps me on my toes because then I don't have to think too hard. And we end up with what's called codependency because the doormat needs the bully needs the doormat. Now, the problem with this is it's not healthy and it's not scalable because when you have a bully and a doormat, you have 1 + 1 = 1.5. Okay. So you can see we're leading to the place where we should all be as leaders, and that is the top right-hand box. Now, the top right-hand box means I have high self-respect, which means I know what I'm doing. I respect my position in the organization, but I also have respect for everyone who works in my organization as well. This philosophy is known as being win-win. And what happens in win-win is the boss now doesn't try and strong arm people to do their job. The boss tries to understand, how do I get the best out of my team? Okay. Now, if you're moving from technician to manager, one of the biggest things you do to become a leader is to earn the right to be a leader. And the way you earn the right, because Annette touched on this, is we measure the quality of a leader by how many followers they have. And so people listen to you, then you're a leader. But you can be a bully and a leader, or you can be a win-win type leader as well. And the difference between a bully as a leader and a win-win leader is that the bully as a leader has to work really hard, right? Because they've got a lot of people that they have to push around and check on every day, and it's exhausting. The win-win leader, and I'll just put the key phrase into here, is what's known as being assertive. Is the assertive leader. Okay. And when I mean assertive, I don't mean aggressive, because the bully is the one that gets seen as aggressive. Okay. So the difference between being assertive and aggressive is really simple. An assertive leader has high respect for the person they're leading. An aggressive person doesn't. Okay. So when you see an aggressive salesperson, they're the one that tries to close the sale regardless of what you need, because they have to get their numbers. Okay. And when you see an assertive salesperson, they're the person that says, I believe if you buy my product, your world will change. And so the reason I bring all this up is that when we start talking about strong leadership, one of the key elements for me is that we need to try and get our whole team into this box. Because in this box, there's a very specific thing that happens. And that specific thing is what's known as synergy. Now, what do I mean by synergy?
Good energy, like
Good energy, yeah. So synergy comes from two words, synchronized energy, which means everyone's kicking the same way. Everyone's on the same page. Everyone's working towards the same objective or goal. And the way that works is when your leadership part of your job is inspiring other people to want to contribute. Okay. Making sense so far?
Yep.
Cool. So our job, when we start talking about Kaizen within the business, is to make sure that we're doing this from a high respect for self, high respect for others, and engage our team in a win-win environment. So being assertive about it, not aggressive. Any questions so far? Cool. Okay, rolling. Step number 2 is to have some common goals. Now, when I worked with Toyota, super interesting, because they made their goal of 5% incremental improvement my goal, because it was in my contract. And I remember it was funny because every year Toyota had this awards ceremony where they would award suppliers, and we won an award for being one of the best suppliers. And the reason we won it is because they said, you exceeded your 5%. Now, it was a bit of a sort of funny thing because we're in IT, which means every year the technology would get better. And so when they asked the questions, we'd say, well, the computer you bought this year is twice as powerful as the one you bought last year, so therefore 50% improvement. And I'm sitting at this table, and this was a black tie event. It was super interesting. And I'm sitting at this black tie event, and the guy next to me looks at me coming back to the table with this award in hand, and he goes, it's all right for you. We manufacture seatbelts. So every year, the 5% improvement that I create is literally just a cost reduction. Like I just charge 5% less every year, which is terrifying. And so he just said every 5-year contract, by the end of it, we're not making money because my costs go up, my rent goes up, my wages go up, but I have to reduce the cost by 5%. And so super interesting when we talk about how do you get Kaizen working in your business? And the answer for Toyota was, well, if our suppliers can't deliver, then we can't deliver. So they're part of our team. So they had this philosophy of the common goal, okay? And the common goal meant that our suppliers all know that our objective as a business is to improve our profitability or our product value by 5% every year. And they have to contractually join us for this common goal. In your team, where I'm going with this is you need to set a goal for your whole business that your team understands they can contribute to if it's Kaizen. And if it's 5%, it's 5%, but you sort of have to decide what that is. I just want to touch quickly on vision, because I know some of you guys know the vision of your organization and some of you are still working through this. And when we talk about vision of an organization, one of the reasons that it's important is that here we are with our team. Okay, this is me drawing you and your team. Some of them are pretty skinny.
Here's one now.
And as you go to work together every day, what generally happens is we end up coming up with what we call obstacles. And obstacles are usually big rocks like that. And when our obstacles show up, a lot of people say, David, I'd love to grow my business, but we've got to deal with the cash flow issue. We've got to deal with the not enough clients issue. We've got to deal with retention issue. We've got to deal with these issues. Now, if we keep looking at obstacles every day, sooner or later, we start to see nothing but problems in our business. The reason vision is so important, and when we talk about common goals, the reason Toyota sticks this 5% in front of you as part of their contract is because they make it your problem, okay? And then they have very good reasoning. They say, listen, every year that you're in business, you actually have 1 more year's experience. And every year that an employee works in your business, they have 1 more year of experience. So technically, they either get better at their job, so they promote, or they become more effective at what they do, which means they can produce more. So now that it's an expectation, it becomes part of that vision. Now, the reason I draw this is that if we have a really big vision for our company, all of a sudden, the size of the obstacle that keeps coming up every day gets smaller. So what used to be an immovable obstacle now just becomes a speed hump. Does this make sense for everybody? So when I talk about common goals in business, one of the reasons that we set goals in business and we set them big is so that when you have an obstacle, which is, lost my biggest client, this and that, it's now just a speed hump because we've got a big picture. We've got a bigger fish to fry. So that's where we talk about common goals. The third piece I want to talk about is what we call ground rules. Now, ground rules become how we make sure that our team are doing the right things. Now, in Toyota, one of their ground rules was we have a suggestion box and we check it every week. And every week we report on how many suggestions have been put in the box. Imagine when you go to your weekly team meeting and they go, this week we had no suggestions. And then next week we have no suggestions. And then after about 6 weeks, we go, it's been now 6 weeks of 0 suggestions. What do you think starts to happen? People start to get a bit anxious and they go, well, we better start thinking about this because this is not sounding good. So we talk about ground rules, and ground rules in business are what are the rules of engagement? What is okay and not okay when people work with you? Everyone knows this head, right? Just Jeff Bezos. He has a very interesting few ground rules. One of them is he's customer evangelistic in his business and everything is about customer experience. If anyone's ever heard, there's a book called The Bezos Letters. Has anyone heard of or read this book? So Jeff Bezos runs Amazon, for those who don't know who he is. And it's one of the largest companies in the world right now. And when he started, everyone thought he was mad. He's never going to make money selling books online and all this sort of story. But he wrote a letter to his shareholders every single year. And I was reading a book last year that was called The Bezos Letters, and it dissects his letters. And in his first letter, he wrote this little comment at the bottom of the letter that said, it's always day one. And the philosophy behind it was simple. He said to all of his employees, every day that you go to work, I want you to think about if we were starting again today and it was day one, what would we do differently? Okay. And so he used that philosophy as part of his first shareholders letter. And 17 years later, every single shareholders letter that goes out refers back to the first letter. Because this is one of his ground rules. You work at Amazon, every day you go to work, I want you to think it's always day one. And there's this nice short video on YouTube, if you can be bothered watching it. And he's at a shareholders meeting and one of the guys, there's questions. And one of the questions was, what happens on day 2? And he laughs a bit because he sort of knows the answer. He goes, day 2 is stasis and day 3 is death. And that was his response, right? Straight off the bat, right? Because his philosophy is it's always day one. That's a nice philosophy because it just means fresh thinking, zero-based thinking. So we need to think about what are the ground rules in your business. Okay, what are the ways that you want your team to perform on a daily basis? There's a thing called high impact ground rules. I'm not going to ask you to scan that now. If you want to get a copy of this, you can. This is a document I picked up a few years back, and it's just a set of 6 rules. And it's called the high impact ground rules, and I'll go through a couple of them quickly. The first one is speak with good purpose. If it doesn't serve, don't say it. And this stops people back chatting within the organization. So I want my team to be positive. The second one is when you disagree or don't understand, ask clarifying questions. So rather than arguing, you ask questions. I won't go through every one of them, but the third one's super important to me. We do this internally. Make only agreements that you are willing and intend to keep. Right? If you cannot keep an agreement, communicate as soon as practical to the appropriate people. Now imagine that everyone you talk to in your business, when you say, can you do this? And they say, yes, you don't have to ask anymore or check anymore. Because as far as they're concerned, it's an agreement. If they can't do it, they come back to you and let you know, which is fine. Because sometimes people can't do things, but rather than just not saying anything, because that frustrates, I don't know about you, but what frustrates me most is when people say, yeah, I've got it. And then you come back a week later and say, how'd you go with that? Oh, I forgot about it. You want me to become the bully, right? Because that's that doormat sort of level of activity. And just to round it off, the fifth one is about talking about systems for correction. So it says when something's not working in the business, look to the system for a solution, right? For correction and propose a system-based solution. Now, for me, Kaizen is literally saying, how do we make a system that we can use to correct the problem? Because Edward Deming's quoted as saying 94% of issues in a business are system related, not people related. 94%. And that's one of the things that of the business philosophy that Edward Deming brought to the table. So this is available, by the way, through the portal, or if you can't find it, just email me and I'll send you the high impact ground rules. This is just an example of what we were just talking about, which is having ground rules. A game plan. Now, number 4 is a game plan, and I'll summarize these at the end. Now, the game plan is literally putting a suggestion box out there and saying people need to put suggestions in is not the answer to the problem. The answer to the problem is, how do we make sure that everyone who's in my business now thinks incremental growth? How do they come back to me and say, I was thinking about how we do this and I think we can do it better? And so the game plan might be that we have regular meetings. One of the things I suggest is that we have a responsibility chart or an org chart within the business. Now, everyone knows what this looks like. It looks something like this. If you don't have one of these, you need to have one of these, even if you're a one-man band, because people report to people and there's a responsibility matrix. And if people don't report up a chain, there's no possible way that I can sit at the top and work out what's going on within that business. Even if I'm a one-person business, I have multiple hats that I wear. If I run a department, there's a hierarchy within that department. It's not about having lots of people. It's about making sure people know which hat they need to wear. Making sense so far? The last thing is that when we get this structure in place, we start to understand what risk-taking is all about and supporting it. I want my team to take a risk and come up with ideas, right? Now, they're not going to do that if they don't have a level of comfort, if they don't have a level of understanding that I'm going to support them in that. Now, I know the two guys, John and Fabrice, work with Steve, who's very big about transferring ownership of departments to the team, because he gets it and he goes, I can't do this on my own. I need people to own that box. I need people to be responsible for everything beneath them. So if it's like running the factory or the warehouse, it's running the warehouse. If it's running sales, it's running sales. I don't want you to come and check with me on everything. I want you to own it. Bang. And that's where he supports risk-taking. Now, for me, there's a really important term here, which is called a quality circle. I touched on this at the start. And a quality circle literally looks like this, right? A quality circle is plan, do, check, and act. Now, I'm going to suggest that each one of you has at least one meeting a week or a month in your business, in your department, where you actually sit down with the people who are on your team and you say, where can we do things better? And then when the suggestions come in, you evaluate them and you come back with response to those suggestions and prioritization. And then you decide what particular things are worth improving, what the project will look like, what needs to be done. How do we check whether it's actually had a positive effect on the business? And then how do we act? So this idea of a quality circle is literally saying, I want my team to come into the business once a month and talk about how can we do things better. Now, the first time we do it, they're going to look at us blankly. The second time we do it and we say no suggestions so far, they're going to start to open up a little bit. But we need to make this part of the business philosophy. And if we do this, you will start to see improvements that are outside of your own thinking. The last thing is that when we have our team and we want them to get involved in this idea of Kaizen, we need to include them and we need to involve them. And there's a little distinction here. Inclusion is up to you as a leader to make sure that everyone is aware of what these improvement initiatives are. Involvement is up to them, right? Because I can lead a horse to water, but I can't make it drink. Now, how we tend to do this is we use a philosophy called the huddle. Now, everyone who hasn't heard this term before, you can Google it. It's literally about having a regular cycle of meetings. Now, I've just got a bit of an example of a template here, and we might sort of go through some of this in the Q&A section today. But for most businesses, I'm not a fan of having meetings for no purpose, but I am a fan of having meetings in areas of the business that I want to improve. And if with my team, if they are on some sort of trajectory and I need to check in. So the questions that I need you to ask around running meetings, right, or huddles is how long, Now, a huddle can be 5 minutes. A huddle can be 50 minutes. It doesn't matter how long it is. It should be how long it needs to be. Okay. You'll have daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly meetings for different areas. And so the what section is what part of the business is this about? The who is the name of the people that are involved in these meetings. And then the question is daily, weekly, monthly, or how long? Now, I'm going to suggest that every one of us who's thinking about Kaizen and improvement in our business decides how we're going to structure the cadence of meetings, the huddles. Okay. Whether you start this with your supervisor or whether you started with your team as a weekly thing, then you start to split off because you'll have different kinds of meetings. You might have meetings around sales and marketing, and then you'll have meetings around quality of delivery. So in your situation, Kate, you're going to have different focuses in different meetings. Now mix them together and you run the risk that one trumps the other. So sometimes we just have a team meeting, a weekly team meeting, and it's too general. And what ends up happening is the guy who's noisiest, the sales guy, will talk through the whole meeting and the other guys get to hide in the background and not really talk about what's going on for them. I'd rather cut it in half and have two 30-minute meetings or two 20-minute meetings, one for sales and one for operations. And we wear different hats during those meetings. So that's the idea of getting everyone involved. So just really to summarize the 6 keys, because we've talked through a lot today. Okay. And there's a whole lot of different elements to what we've talked about, but I just want to summarize this and we'll sort of have a quick Q&A on this. The very first part of this is that there is a sequence of events that need to occur in most businesses. And it starts with this person, this idea of strong leadership. Strong leadership is going to come down to how clear are you on what the big picture is, the vision for the company or for the department, and how willing is your team to come on this journey with you. Okay. Now we talk about common goals, and one of the critical elements here is that it has to be a goal that includes everybody who's part of that area of the business. Okay. So having a goal to make more money for me doesn't serve my team. Okay. Having a goal to serve more people serves my team, but it also helps my client base as well. What are the rules of engagement? What are the rules of the game for you? Okay. And then who does what by when? So who's responsible and how do we structure this? Now, this section here is literally just the base. Okay. And for me to have a successful team that is Kaizening my business, I need to make sure that I'm clear on where we're going. I take lead, so I drive the behavior. I have some rules of engagement. So if we're going to have these meetings, they start on time, they finish on time, whatever it might be. And then I have allocated responsibility to different people. I'm very clear on who does what. Okay. Then we can work on this second section, which is where we start looking at how do we get the team to open up? So how do we get them to actually come up with some suggestions for what we should be doing? And how do we make sure that they don't get ousted, so they don't feel like it's not to do with them? And how do we get them motivated to get engaged? And so if we implement these 6 keys, what ends up happening is we're going to start to see incremental improvements in the business. But it all starts with leadership. So I've talked a lot this morning. I'm going to stop for a minute now and I'm just going to go around the table. 2 things. What's resonated, what's inspired you so far out of this conversation, or what thought process or questions do you have? Kate, let's start with you. You're on my left.
Well, there's a lot to think about there. And I think you sort of thinking about my own situation, I'm not sure that I know what to say in a huddle.
Yeah. You won't know what to say when you start because you've never run them before, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing, if you've got nothing to say, don't run a meeting.
Okay.
Okay. The idea is that meetings, like if you think about how effective meetings run, an effective meeting will only run if there's a purpose.
Right.
So I'll give you a metaphor for this. Do anyone here watch the basketball? Basketball is a very fast-paced game, right? It sort of has 20-minute quarters, I think it is, and they move really quickly. And usually in the last 10 minutes, it can be anyone's game. And in the last 3 seconds of the game, you hear timeout. And you go, there's 3 seconds. Why are we timing out? Oh, because we want to stop the momentum. We want to strategize. We want to talk about how we're going to, you know, and so timeouts are really critical elements when a game is close. Okay. Timeouts in a basketball game are used to slow the momentum of the opposition, to regroup the team, and to really think about how to respond to what's going on. All right. Your team meetings should be the same. Okay. So if you're not clear on the purpose of a team meeting, then I'd suggest you don't run it, because it'll end up becoming one of those things that people sit there looking at their watch and waiting for you to come up with some genius stuff that you may not have. But as soon as you have a mission, as soon as you've decided we're going to do this in our business, I can enroll my team and say, I'm going to run a meeting every week because we've got a new initiative. And I want everyone to know what we're doing. It's not going to be a long meeting because we haven't got that much to talk about right now, but I just need you to know so that if you see anything that relates to what we're doing, you can contribute. Does that sort of make sense? If we do this as a live event, we do an activity around this, because I find people, like, it is useful to have meetings if you've got purpose. If you're trying to get people together, and this is the leadership component. Let's say Fabrice runs a warehouse. How many guys you got working in the warehouse, Fabrice?
Well, there's 2 at the moment.
2. So imagine I say, hey, we should run a team meeting every week. And the guys go, what do you mean? We know what to do. We just need to do it. If we run a meeting, we'll have less time to do what we have to.
Mm-hmm.
But Fabrice goes, you know, I believe we can improve the productivity of the warehouse staff by just thinking about how we can do it better. And so I'm setting a goal to improve our productivity by 10% over the next 6 months. Common goal. And we're going to use this meeting for you guys to come up with ways we can do it. So now the meeting has leadership and a common goal. You with me on this, Kate? So the question is, don't run a meeting for meeting's sake. Work out what is it you want to achieve that requires your team to be involved, and set a goal. And throw it on the table and say, guys, we've got some movement, and I can help you with this individually, because I know you're here for a reason. You're here to grow the business. But if your team don't know that that's what you're doing, they're sort of isolated. They're not being involved. Okay. So there's a question of, when do we share the vision with the team and get them to come on the journey with us and become involved? Make sense? Cool. Fabrice, what's resonated with you out of today? What's been most beneficial? Do you have any areas that you want to open up for chat?
It's
What stuck out to you as something that's, you know, I think that's great.
well, to talk to your team and find a goal to do it. And because where I used to work before, it was a big joint, but
Yeah.
anything you say, they want your opinion, but at the end of the day, nothing counts.
Yeah.
So that really makes sense what you're saying, that, you know, if you do something, you better, you know, implement everyone.
Yeah. So in your world, see, I'd be sitting down with Stephen or with Max, and I'd be saying, so if we were to run a team meeting with the people in the warehouse every week, what sort of things should we be thinking about?
Yeah.
And they'll help you identify what the common goal is. But if there's no common goal, then what happens is the team meeting just becomes a time waster. Boring. It's boring, right? Hey guys, we're going to meet to talk about, you know, there's this project and that project and this project, and they go, yeah, we run that. And so it becomes almost like a witch hunt. Let's run through all the projects together. Right? I'd rather have a really clear vision, which is, hey guys, we want to talk about how we can improve the speed at which things come in and out of the warehouse.
Yeah.
And so then we throw a challenge down. And this comes back to the vision that we were talking about earlier. Yeah, excellent. John, let's hear from you. You're in the corner taking notes. Are you?
Yeah.
What have you picked up?
I was really happy with the disagree, and when you disagree, ask questions, don't argue.
Yeah.
That's I do the different, the opposite. So I argue rather than asking questions. And the inclusion and improvement, inclusion is up to the leader, and the improvement I wrote is us to improve, you know, the new ideas, whatever is to be implemented.
Yeah, brilliant. Brilliant. So you can see there's a few things in here, and it's going to take a bit of digestion, but the philosophy of Kaizen is relatively simple. The question is, how can we do it better? But then if the team don't respond to that, then chances are it's a bit too vague a question, right? And often I've learned that the response I get to my question is how effectively I've communicated. So if I'm really specific and I say, look, in regard to sales, there's a problem. We take too long to quote. How can we quote faster? That's a much more specific question than how can we do things better, okay? But it's up to the leader to come up with what they think is an area of concern and throw that on the table. Because very quickly, when you have a specific question and you throw it in front of a team, you can move through the answers and get a whole lot of great ideas. But if you don't have a question, then they just look at you, or if the question's too broad, they look at you like, I don't know what to say. Awesome. Annette, what's resonated for you out of today? What's been most useful?
A few things. I think there's been, because I'm a one-person show, there's a lot of scaling down of things. So the responsibility diagram, I think, is something that I've kind of thought about, but actually haven't put down on paper. So to clarify all my roles and see where there might be some friction in that space.
Yep.
I liked your quality circle. It reminded me very much of an OODA loop, which I've used a lot in the past, and I'm using my planning now. So that was sort of consolidating an action I'm already taking, and probably to boost my vision statement, which I have been working on, but I did put it aside last week and I need to get it out again and finish it.
Yeah, look, the hard part is, and you sort of touched on it there, is you're a one-man band. So you're sitting there going, my responsibility chart has one box, me. But here's the thing, right? When we go forward 5 years, and this is why we encourage people to do a 5-year vision, it's going to be bigger than you. And so that helps identify and isolate what those boxes need to be. And sometimes people feel weird. They go, so there's 10 boxes on here, but it's still all me. I go, yeah, I get it. But we're planning for the future here, right? Because if we don't, as a leader, one of the things a leader must do is go into the future and look at what things need to look like in the future. And if a leader does that well, they can then come back to the team and go, I know where we're going. I know what it's going to look like in the future. I know it doesn't exist right now, but my job is to help you guys understand what we're building. Okay, because without you guys understanding what we're building, you're just coming to work every day. And we end up in this situation where contractors do as they're told, employees become our burden. We have to work out how to justify their wage, as opposed to them coming on the journey with us and understanding where they fit. So there's a lot to be said for being clear on what you're building, okay? Because when you're clear on what you're building, meetings take on a slightly different purpose. They're not just checking how you're going. It's, hey, we're going here as an organization, and I just wanted to share it with you, and I want to get you guys to understand why we're going there. And so now you're tuning their thinking to, okay, well, if we're going there, then I understand why you're asking, how can we do things better? Because if I go straight up to Fabrice and say, how can we do it better? He looks at me like, what's wrong with what I'm currently doing? I'm working as hard as I can. So he takes it as a personal, what's wrong with me? But that's because I haven't given him the vision. If I said, Fabrice, next year we're going to have twice as much stuff coming through this warehouse because our company is going to grow. Where do you think we're going to have problems? He's going to be able to go, oh, if we had twice as much, we'd have this and that. And all of a sudden he can now give me answers. Okay. And this is why vision is so important, because without vision, it sounds like witch hunting. So guys, how can we do it better? Well, what's wrong with what we're currently doing? No, nothing's wrong with it. Well, why are you asking? Well, because I'm going over there. Oh, you never told us that part. So be wary with leadership. There's a responsibility to explaining why you're asking questions or why you're having meetings. Okay. So don't have meetings just and say, hey, we're going to have a meeting because David said so. That's never going to wash well. But hey, I've been thinking about next year, and next year I'm thinking we're going to double our revenue. So I wanted to just have a meeting and just sort of pick your guys' brains. So if we double next year, where are the cracks going to appear in our business? That's a very specific question. And that's going to help with Kaizen as well. Well, if we have to double, we'll need twice as many pallet racks. Great. Have we got room for those? No. But we can't afford a new warehouse right now, but we need to be planning for that. Okay, so what's the threshold? How much capacity we got now? We're at 80%. Great. So as we get to 95, we need to, and we start planning forward. That's a good distinction. Awesome. Awesome. So look, it's just right on 10 o'clock. I just want to get what's been the one thing that stuck with you out of today Like if we had to use one key element, what was the one thing that stuck? I know with Fabrice, with John, you sort of said this idea of having rules, having ground rules, and literally, not arguing. Rather than arguing, just ask clarifying questions. That's a simple and very interesting distinction, though, because often arguments are just misunderstandings. Okay. And so if we have common objectives, then we can use those points of reference to get creative and ask clarifying questions. Great. So quickly around the table, Annette, what's been the big thing for you out of today?
Probably a reminder that the only constant is change.
Yeah, and sometimes as the owner of a business, you have to be prepared to talk about the future without really having a clear pathway to it, because that's how the team can then come on board. Yeah, awesome. John, for you, biggest lesson out of today?
I like Steve. Was it Steve Bezos?
Jeff Bezos.
Jeff Bezos. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's always day one, fresh thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
fantastic. Fantastic.
Give me a bit more thoughts.
Great. And for you, Fabrice? You have to unmute.
Keep improving.
Yeah, just the idea of constant
yeah.
improvement. Absolutely. Very good. Very good. And Kate?
Just inclusion and engagement and how to do that.
Yeah, and it's a great question, is how do I get my team engaged? How do I get them to enjoy coming to meetings? Well, we have to have purpose. And so we have to think about what's the meeting for. And if it has a purpose, then they'll engage. Brilliant. Hope today's been useful. It's a lot to take in one session. But really the fundamentals of building a winning team, there's 6 steps, and this will be recorded and put in the portal as well for review. But if you've got anything specific in there that you're stuck on, please reach out and we can take a deep dive into those areas as well.
Okay.
Awesome. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
See you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Okay, bye.